Hello, I am Joseph, and today I'll be going over the analysis of environmental factors of phosphorus. So let us begin. Now, to better understand how phosphorus affects our environment, let us begin by understanding phosphorus in general and how it affects the human body and plants alike. Now, phosphorus is a component of nucleic acids, proteins, and is present in every cell in the human body, or specifically the phospholipids that make up cell membranes. And because of that, phosphorus is a necessity for life. But you need more than just trace minerals like iron and zinc because phosphorus is a micromineral. And some other typical microminerals include calcium, sodium, magnesium, potassium chloride, and sulfur. And the body mostly uses phosphorus to develop and maintain bones and teeth. Additionally, it contributes significantly to the synthesis of the genetic elements that make up the human body. As you can see here, DNA and RNA. Metabolism, including how calories and oxygen are turned to energy, how muscles contract, how the heart beats, and even how nerve impulses are delivered, are all significantly influenced by phosphorus. Awesome. So now we're going to begin the process of going through the two main categories in which we'll be finding phosphorus in our environments, which is the soil and water. So beginning with soil, the soil nutrients have an impact on crop development and yields, with phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen availability in the soil being important growth factors. Chemical fertilizers and manure are widely used to raise the phosphorus content in the soil because most soils do not contain enough phosphorus. The discovery and creation of phosphorus and phosphorus-based fertilizers can be traced back to the history of modern management techniques. Crop yields were static prior to the Green Revolution, but they have been steadily increasing ever since. As a result of this, and conventional phosphorus management, the levels of phosphorus in soil have dramatically dropped. Despite the fact that the agricultural world is changing quickly, traditional soil phosphorus management and essential adjustments can be clarified by understanding historical viewpoints as they affect contemporary thought. Understanding phosphorus, how it is studied, its various forms and applications, as well as its usage specifically in environmental monitoring. And this picture here was included just to show how phosphorus content has changed in our natural environment, in this case showing its progression that phosphorus naturally goes through its cycle, both by plant and animal tissue. If there's no human involvement, it would take centuries to go from, you can see the top picture to the bottom picture. Subsequently, with the acceleration by the land use, is pretty much divides the time by a tenth. So what would once took centuries to get from step 1 to step 3, or is now only decades. Okay, so now that we've covered phosphate in soil in the general sense, now we're just going to be a little bit more specific into how phosphorus affects the environment at which it is absorbed and utilized. So for starting here, as you can see, we have soil and environment in general. contains phosphorus in many different forms. It is a crucial nutrient for plants since it aids in their growth and development. It exists in soil as phosphate, which is a component of mineralized bone and other minerals, such in this case by the passing of biological creatures. It also exists in water as phosphate in the ionized form PO4 with 3 extra electrons attached, which is a component of the phosphorus cycle, and in air as phosphorus particulates in the form of P2O5. Phosphorus serves as a catalyst when applied to plants as fertilizer and is typically thought of as a technique to help them grow bigger and quicker. Plants use phosphorus in photosynthesis, which speeds up and improves the quality of plant growth. When there is less phosphorus available, photosynthesis is correspondingly restricted, which directly impacts the color of the plant. Because sugar is the plant's main source of energy, and even animals themselves, different forms of sugar, of course, being converted, a lack of it will restrict their ability to grow. Plants with low phosphorus levels won't be green, and for mentioned, the color of the plant will change to more of a purple. And phosphorus is absorbed into the soil when rocks are crushed and washed into it, either surface level or somewhere down below, potentially even through aquifers. Phosphorus is taken up by the roots and used by the plants, as you can see in the picture here, in the organic and inorganic forms, and the inorganic being the orthorophosphate and the polyphosphate that you might find in the fertilizers and possibly even the pesticides and herbicides. Phosphorus, which enriches plant growth, is crucial for preserving the equilibrium and health of the ecosystem. It enables healthier plants to grow stronger so that they can produce more oxygen for the air and nourish the animals that eat them. An ecosystem may become more affluent by providing more food and oxygen at appropriate amounts. And just go over a little bit of the sources that you may find some of these spillage into the natural environment. I did mention the fertilizer runoff, but also could be from garbage dump runoff. Sewage and industrial waste is another source of phosphorus being finding its way into the ecosystem. Of course, that'd be more of the inorganic sense. Coal emissions and household chemicals as well fall under the inorganic sources of phosphorus in our environmental soils. Okay, and as related to those sources that I just mentioned, phosphorus can thus be harmful to the environment as well as to people's healths. The improper application of minerals or organic fertilizers, the cutting down of hedges, the tilling of unsuitable soil, the absence of winter crop cultivation, the improper treatment of domestic and industrial wastewater, or even atmospheric sources are all examples of poor farming management that can result in an increase in phosphorus levels. Historically, manure has been a cheap natural resource for both nitrogen and phosphate. The excess phosphorus, however, can build up in the soil as phosphate and enter the water system through runoff and soil erosion when the supply of these nutrients exceeds the needs of plant growth. And as also mentioned, eutrophication does also happen within the water systems, where so much phosphorus is present, thus inciting the algae to produce, and which then, for all intents and purposes, strangles the marine life that surrounds it, and is very harmful to natural environment if it's killing off all the other marine life that's using the water to survive, and strangling the ecosystem, plant and animal life within it. And some treatments that are commonly used for this, they have the chemical, which is specific metal salts, aluminum sulfate and ferric chloride being two specific ones that are common. And as for the way that they typically test them, so that way they can see the levels and compare them to different testing samples, they use the analytical processes of mostly spectroscopy with some spectrometry, dealing with NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, infrared, far and near, as well as Raman spectroscopy and X-ray absorption. But as for the control methods, and at the beginning of a current application, to further explain how phosphorus is tested in the environment and how we might potentially sample said phosphorus, we'll now be going through some current examples of that. And in our picture here just shows how they, from a visual perspective, how would they test to see where the most crucial areas of investigation and sampling should be. I mentioned earlier about eutrophication, which is can be a result of the overgrowth of aquatic plants and algae when it's introduced into the water. Fish and other aquatic species may thus perish as a result of this reduced oxygen level in the water. Insufficient dissolved oxygen in the water can cause fish and other aquatic creatures to suffocate when dead. Algae and cyanobacterial cells are broken down by bacteria in the lakes and rivers. Excessive blooms can prevent sunlight from accessing the water, which is typical in Florida. They have a bloom of algae typically every summer, and thus they warn people not to go swimming. And thus suffocation of important submerged aquifera will also thus be affected as well. And these effects of phosphorus on the environment is the key issue being investigated in the study that we'll be covering next by Gary Phones and his associates. Wonderful. Now we're to the meat and potatoes of our talk for today. We'll be going through the case study of the Upper River Itchen, forgive my mispronunciation if it so happened, in the United Kingdom. Elevated phosphorus levels were detected in the Upper River Itchen, so they wanted to specify to see exactly where the highest levels were and potential causes for why there were differentiating specimens. So between May 2016 and June of 2017, samples were taken of the Hampshire province in England, of 5 different places each day. The phosphorus was tested and identified, and they mapped on how that changed over time. And as well as they noted any changes in the species of the local area, and they included filterable reactive phosphorus, total filterable phosphorus, total phosphorus, as well as the total particulate phosphorus. And now on to how the samples were taken and where they were taken. So there are 5 distinct locations in which they took their samples. There was the area prior to the River Ire and River Itchen, converging around the Borough Bridge, downstream of the Alres Ford, above and below Old Alres Ford Pond, on a branch of the River Alre, up and downstream of the River Itchen of a trout fishery, and of course the large straight stretch of the river Itchen itself. The way they tested is they had 1 liter polypropylene bottles used with pre-cleaned with 5% decon, rinsed with milli-Q ultra pure water, and contained mercuric chloride as a preservative. Samples were taken every 24 hours. 500 milliliter aliquots of that were then taken and stored, transported to the lab to be tested. And each sample was determinately tested either at 4 degrees Celsius for analysis or at 121 degrees Celsius, depending on what the particulate they were trying to isolate. And they used autoclave using the conventional alkaline persulfate technique. And as mentioned here, the phospho-moly genuine blue colorimetry examination of these different fractions with continuous flow autoanalyzer to be tested in red at 880 nanometers. And then they were then reanalyzed if they didn't meet the calibration standards created with the potassium dihydrogen phosphate. Excuse me. Phosphorus was measured using the software and external calibration method as mentioned, or specifically the analyzer was a ConiLab discrete analyzer at 880 nanometers as well. And if it was found that the reaction complex actually turned brilliant blue or quite blue, very blue, when reduced with ascorbic acid as well. So through all those tests that they did for over a year, from what they found, the mean value ranged between 69 and 82% of the total phosphorus present was total particulate phosphorus. And this could be explained if the sources were agricultural runoff. So that's what they theorized was the biggest proportion of what was being brought into the waterways of the river Itchen. And the mean concentrations occasionally exceeded the 0.62 milligrams per liter regulatory limits over a period of 1 to 2 weeks, which was noted as having an adverse ecological effect on this type of river as well. And as mentioned, because of those spikes, there has been evidence that has found that the ecosystems of benthic invertebrates in these ecologically delicate chalk streams, including the blue-winged olive mayfly, have been greatly affected. The environmental agencies and adequate regulatory monitoring mechanisms frequently failed to catch these exceedances, and the studies showed that the high-frequency monitored is the only approach to properly understand the complexity of phosphorus within these chalk stream ecosystems, and came to the conclusion that there is a significant need for additional research in the biological impacts of these changes in phosphorus content. And the impact of fine silt in the form of suspended particulate matter may also be taken into account, since it might be another source of phosphorus that was not accounted for in their study. So I know that's a lot of information we went through, but fundamentally in this presentation, I pretty much outlined the long history and the current situation of phosphorus in the environment, and sampled some of the impacts on plant life as well as human, specifically in soil and water sampling. For further research, sample preparation, statistical analysis, sampling procedures, sampling methods need to further be improved in order to get better results of phosphorus in its matrix. And as well as the main takeaways is simply that phosphorus may be good and essential for life here on Earth, but there are both ecological and human health impacts that need to be considered. So further regulations on runoff sources need to be either improvements on them, or we need to try our best to reduce our impact on creating any more runoff than is necessary for whatever process we're doing, agriculturally, industrial, as well as any other personal supplies, such as the clean supplies you might have at your house that you might pour down the drain or dispose of improperly. So at this point in time, there is proof that phosphorus content increases may have an impact on the biological makeup of different invertebrates, specifically in our example that we went over today. So the best course of action would be to improve those analytical abilities to recognize phosphorus, to reduce our contributions as stated, and potentially to create new methods for its removal and separation as well. So before we go for today, I'd like you to write down these questions, long and short answer, to be brought in for tomorrow as your participation credit for the day. And look forward to seeing you all tomorrow with answers to these responses. So for those in the back, I'll read them out loud for you. How do human activities influence the concentration of phosphorus in the environment? And give at least 3 examples of these activities. Why is phosphorus considered a fundamental element in biology? And which organic compounds are phosphorus found in? Explain why the addition of phosphate compounds to aquatic areas typically have a dramatic effect on biological productivity. What is your takeaway from the study done in the Upper River Itchen? What did they do right? What did they do wrong? What would you have done differently? And finally, write a short summary about an article you find that analyzes phosphorus content. Relate your findings to the study that we just went over, and reflect and note on any correlations between different environmental elements and ecological cycles. And with that being said, if you have any questions, you have my email address, so feel free to message there, so that way tomorrow when we come back, we can go over any of those questions and go over the participation credit that I've provided for you before our lesson is over. So until tomorrow, this has been Teacher Joseph, and see you soon.